So who is a preschooler with a disability? Because if we can answer that question, we can increase the accuracy of our disability determinations. Okay, so traditionally, call it traditionally, historically, sort of the way that I was trained when I got my master's way too many years ago, we have a child who needs to be evaluated. We make a referral to the evaluators, the ed evaluators, psychologists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. They perform formal testing. They may have a short informal testing section that basically says, this is what the child did wrong on the test, and this is what the child did right on the test. But still, almost 100% based on results of the formal testing. Then they make disability determinations based on a single test score. And finally, they place the student. Most of the kids in New York City who get evaluated end up with an IEP. How accurate are our disability determinations? Why need an evaluation process if they're mostly going to get evaluated and end up with an IEP? How do we increase the accuracy? So I just pulled from I have tons of evaluations that I received from the field on my desk. And this is a 2-year, 10-month-old boy. This is very, very typical that you see. Boy, auditory comprehension score of 55, percentile rank, first percentile rank. I mean, 99% of the population has better comprehension than this child. They give an age equivalent, sends chills up my spine, and a standard deviation of 3 standard deviations below the mean. That is meaning more than 99% of the population performs better than this child. There's got to be some kids like that, but not many. Expressive language, similar numbers, age equivalent, single score, and then the total language. Here's one that was on my desk from a psychologist using the WIPSI-3. Now this is a very interesting one. I just pulled it off my desk and put the numbers up, and I was sitting looking at it as I was putting together the talk, and I thought, you know, when you look at the verbal IQ, 55. That and a full scale IQ of 58. This is a child who is cognitively severely impaired. More than 99% of the population is cognitively more apt than this child, can learn better, has better cognitive skills. Yet, on the Vineland, communication was low, but daily living, he can dress himself, he can put his shoes on, he can feed himself. How do you square that cognitive IQ, full-scale IQ and verbal IQ, with a child who can dress himself and look at the motor skills? He can run, he can jump. Motor skills are typically developing. You've got to question an evaluation that doesn't think about this, that thinks, how could those scores be correct? So Tom Hehir was hired by the New York City Department of Ed to do a review of all the special education system and come up with an analysis of it and recommendations. What Tom Hehir found, if you'd read this with me, was a review of more than 50 diagnostic reports of students with disabilities in New York City clearly shows that standardized tests are at the heart of the diagnostic process in New York City. And he continued to say, under the medical model, where there is a fundamental reliance on tests, this is a very serious problem. Now you can find the Hehir Report by just Googling Hehir 2005 and it will pop up. Hehir also found that bilingual assessment personnel reports and the interviews held suggest that bilingual assessors are badly in need of more extensive professional development on how to conduct bilingual assessment. Well, embarrassing for those of us who are bilingual evaluators. All of them, for example, continues Hehir, show a dearth of knowledge about second language acquisition and on the possible impact of these student underlearning, underachievement test scores and diagnoses. Yeah. He also says the most fundamental issues regarding student levels of English proficiency or about students' English language developmental histories or on students' pedagogical experiences, were they in English only, dual language, what kind of placement, are often missing from the reports of the bilingual assessment personnel. Occasionally, the reports rely on highly questionable indices of language dominance, such as asking students in what language they dream or in what language they speak with their peers. Sometimes, what do they watch on TV? There's a lot of research showing this is irrelevant for the most part. And yet what we're doing is doing evaluations, thinking that the bilingual personnel have a strong knowledge base to make an extraordinarily big challenge, meaning to distinguish a difference, second language acquisition, issues based on low socioeconomic backgrounds, from a true disability. Right now we're not making that distinction. Hehir found a lot of it had to do with the knowledge base of the bilingual personnel and also the over-reliance on standardized test scores by all of us. He also found that there's a disjuncture between what the New York City Department of Ed guidelines recommend and what assessment personnel are really doing. Either the DOE guides have not been widely disseminated or they have no impact on actual practice. So I'm a lawyer as well as being a speech language pathologist. And I've been doing evaluations since the early 90s. One of the things that always bothered me, because I'm a lawyer, I look at the law, I look at the policies, I look at the guidelines. It was very clear the correct way to do evaluations, which is what we're talking about in these 2 days. From the law, from the regs, from the policies, guidelines, from New York City, going back over 20 years. But the clinical practice was so different from that. And why? And to try to do evaluations in a way that was consistent with the law, regs, guidelines, was difficult. I have to tell you, when people say, you have to provide scores, everybody, I've been doing evaluations since before I was connected to Teachers College, and at least since 1995, and I think since 1994, I have never provided scores in my evaluations. So this idea that you have to use a standard score, an age equivalency score, and come up with a percentage of delay, I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of preschool evaluations and a couple thousand school-age evaluations. So that idea that, oh, you can't possibly do it is just false.